Today we're going to cook some pork shoulder on the Brinkmann Trailmaster smoker. It's been sitting back here getting kind of neglected, and I don't like my pits to feel unloved, so I got to break them out once in a while and put them to work for me. So stick around, we got some good stuff coming. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the managing of the pit where you're cooking. Just the basics of how these things work, because not everybody really knows and everybody's scrambling sometimes to understand it. So just quick, we'll talk about how this works. This is a vertical offset smoker, but all smokers generally work the same. If it's an enclosed pit, I don't care if it's just a backyard Weber kettle grill or the more elaborate grills or something like this here, this pit, the Brinkmann. But you have an intake vent down here where your fire's at, and then you've got your exhaust vent on the other end of the smoker, whether your heat source is directly below. In this case it's offset, so it's to the side. So what's going to happen is we're going to set this vent back here so that the fire, when the fire is burning in the pit, it's going to need air in order to continue burning, and it's going to pull from wherever it can find its easiest source of air. That's going to be this vent. So using that vent you can control the amount of heat you have on your coals and on your wood. What happens is your cooking chamber will heat up and the chimney effect begins. So as this heats up, it starts to actually draw from the fire and it will vent out here. So you need, it's going to be really important to get this up to temperature before you put your meat on, because until that happens, you're going to have a lot of soot and not the right kind of stuff that you want on your meat. You really want to get this thing kind of puffing on its own. Once you get that chimney effect going, it's an emotion, and then you can adjust your intake and your exhaust to regulate the airflow and the heat. But you want that right airflow. You don't want that real sooty smoke, and you want constant airflow through your pit cooking your meats. Okay, so we have our coals lit out there and we're getting them ready to go on the pit, and then we'll regulate that temperature like we talked about. In the meantime, let's talk about what we're cooking. I've got a couple of pork butt roasts here from the shoulder, and these are pushing about 10 pounds. Now, your cook time is going to have everything to do with the size of what you're cooking, as well as the temperature that you cook it in. We're not going to go into recipes so much as we are going to go into the process. I think the process is really the most important thing to know. Now, it's well known that these are really forgiving pieces of meat. They're not hard to cook. You put them on for a long period of time and eventually they break down and you've got yourself some pulled pork. But if you really want to knock it out of the park, there's some specifics that's going to make yours stand above everybody else's. You have to remember that there is such a thing as overcooking this. If you got this really mushy meat that just, you have mush and you know, you get your sauce in there if you sauce it or whatever, and you get this wet mushy piece of meat. A lot of people will eat that, the flavor could be right, and they'll love it and they'll think it's the best thing ever. But if you leave a little bit of chew in there, you want it to pull, and that means to have some pull. You don't want it to just fall apart. Everybody wants to cook it till it falls apart. But really good pulled pork does have to be pulled. It's got to have a little tug to it. It's got to have a little chew to it when it's in your mouth. So we'll kind of go on to the details of that when we get to the end of the cooking process. But for now, we're going to kind of show you what I do to get there. My choice of wood today primarily is going to be apple wood. It's my go-to wood when I'm cooking a big meat like this, because it's going to be on the pit for a long time. And so it's going to be subject to a lot of smoke. Some woods tend to be a lot stronger, a lot smokier, and when you're done cooking you're going to wind up with a bitterness, or sometimes, I don't know if you've ever done this before, cooked something and pulled it off the pit and it almost leaves a sting on your tongue. Now, that's not a good kind of smoky flavor for your barbecue. You want a nice subtle mild smoke running all the way through the meat. Applewood is mild enough that you can burn for long periods of time without over smoking it. Later on I'll probably throw a nutwood on, like maybe some almond or something, a little more robust smoke if I think I need it, but I don't want to subject it, you know, in a closed pit situation to long periods of really strong smoke. So it's applewood. We've got a few coals in here already, and I'm adding some lit coals from the chimney. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open my vents all the way up on the intake and on the chimney side to get the air moving quickly through the pit. The idea is to get this metal heated up so we can get that chimneying effect that we talked about. Okay, she's cranking at about 270 degrees, and we're getting the right kind of smoke out of it that we want to see. We don't even have the wood on yet. This is still some of the charcoal smoking, and I'm going to let it continue to climb. Now 270, 275, 250 is kind of right in the range of where I typically like to cook. You know, you can go hotter and faster. There's all kinds of debates about that. I don't worry about it. If I have a pit that's running hot, then I deal with it and I cook on it that way. But we're going to regulate the heat after we get the meat on, because when that meat goes in, it's going to instantly start to absorb things. So if you're running hot before you put your meat on, and don't worry about it, it's going to pull that heat back real quick. First of all, just from opening the door, it's going to do that, but the meat's going to absorb a lot of it right away, and so you're going to see a drop in temperature when you first put your product on your pit. So once you get it on there, again, get the heat back up, and then you can go to your vents and set them up for your airflow to regulate the heat that you're getting. We'll talk a little bit about the rub that I have on here. It's just a standard barbecue rub, so it's got sugars and salt and all kinds of different spices in it. You know, whatever rub is your preference, that's what I'd recommend you go with. Personally, I like low salt rubs, at least for what I'm doing right now. Maybe a higher content of salt if it's something that's not going to sit in a rub for very long before I put it on. But this stuff has been sitting in dry rub, marinating with dry rub on it in the refrigerator for 24 hours now. So I didn't use something that had a lot of salt to it. That salt will pull the moisture out of the roast, and unless you're going to dry brine over several days with it wrapped up tightly, you stand a chance of losing some of your moisture. I didn't really want that. I wanted enough moisture to come out into the meat to hydrate the spices on the outside so they can start releasing their flavors and stuff on the meat. And then this morning I added some kosher salt to the top of it to bring that salt content up. So that's how I set these ones up, just my preference. Okay, it's been a few minutes, and we're quickly approaching 350 degrees, so that's pretty much where I want to be to put the meat on. You can see that the smoke's kind of down to a minimal now, and I got a good effect of the whole chimneying process going. So we're going to go ahead and stick them pork roast on here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to lose some temperature just by opening the door alone. The meat's going to go on, it's going to pull it back even more, and then I'm going to throw on some wood chunks, and that's going to create some smoke in the cooking chamber and in the fire pit, and that's also going to reduce the amount of available oxygen, and that heat's going to come back and settle just about where I want it to be. Okay, so on with the meat. Okay, so the meat's on the pit, and you saw how quickly I jammed those roasts in there. Now that meat's still relatively cold. I've had it sitting out for a little bit trying to get it a little closer to room temperature, but it's that time of year, so a little slow process. But just from that quick putting that meat on there, our temperatures were pushing 350 degrees, and we are now at 275 degrees. So we had an instant drop. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put some wood chunks in here, get some smoke moving through this pit, and then once we get that kind of puffing away, we'll go ahead and set our vents to kind of control our temperature. And this type of pit, you got to kind of maintain it. You know, you want to continue to stoke the fire, and you play with the vents a little bit to regulate your heat. There's better pits out there that need a lot less hands-on, like the Weber Smoky Mountain pits that I sometimes cook on. But this is just one of those days that this is what I want to do. I want to come out here and play with my pit and cook something. So we'll get that wood on right now. This is what you want your smoke to look like when it's coming out of the pit. It should look like it's being just pushed out, forced out, and it shouldn't be real black. You know, more of a white color. Sometimes in the right light, it's got kind of a blue hue to it. But that's what you need to develop a really good smoke ring. We'll talk about that later, but this is exactly what you want your pit to look like when your meat's finally on there and smoking. Okay, so we're approaching 3 hours into this cook, and it's been chugging along pretty good. We were riding around 225, 250, kind of fluctuating there for a little bit, and it was doing real good. I went ahead and stoked the fire up a little bit, opened the vent up a little bit, and I'm bringing that temperature up 275. I want at this point to ride 275 to 300 degrees, and kind of start speeding it up a little bit. We're going to get to the point where there's what we call a stall that happens in the meat. Basically, the internal temperature of the meat, we want to try to get it up to around 200 degrees, maybe a little over, and we want it to ride at that for just a little bit, so that all the fats and connective tissue inside of the roast will start to dissolve, and that's what makes the meat tender. So we want to get to that point, and typically along the way, larger roasts like this sometimes will stall, and they'll just kind of hang for the longest time. And what's happening during that stall, now you can power through it, you can increase your heat and push that meat through that stall, and if you're going to not wrap your meat or anything and try to cook it all the way through, that's going to be important, because what you're doing at that point is you're just dehydrating the outside of that roast, you know, and it'll just deeper and deeper start to dry the meat out. So if you're going to hit that stall and try to cook through it, you really need to put that temperature up. That's not really my intention. I just want to bring the temperature up. I want to speed the cook up a little bit. I'm intending for this cook to run about 8 hours total. So once I get it up to maybe another hour, hour and a half of cooking in the open with the smoke, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap it up. And that's going to also, when you wrap your meat, it pushes it through that stall a whole lot faster. But time to get these guys out of the pit and get them foiled up. Okay, we're going to pour a little bit of apple juice over these guys. Not a whole lot, but just a certain amount. Maybe a half a cup worth. And people do this, they call it a mop, but that's not really the reason I'm doing it. You know, the purpose of a mop is to have some moisture inside of the foil to help steam and cook the meat to tender quicker and better. These pork butts have plenty of moisture that's going to leak out of here, and there's going to be a whole bunch of it. There's enough moisture, you don't have to add anything for these, but that apple juice is going to add a certain layer of flavor when it cooks at those high temperatures, along with the juices that come out of this. It's going to make a really great au jus, and I'll show you what we do with that once we come up with it. Back in you go. Okay, we're 6 hours in. We're losing light, but we're still cooking. Pit's running about 300 degrees at this point. Got a good flow coming out of the chimney here. So 6 hours in, we got a couple more hours to go. Right now we're right on target. I'm going to stick a thermometer in there in a little bit and we'll see where we're at. Really, the internal temperature of the meat dictates how long this cook's going to happen, but I'm thinking we're probably right on target. Okay, so we've run out of light, but I just stuck a thermometer in there, and we're just a little hair over 200 degrees. So we're going to pull these roasts out. They're going to go inside, they're going to rest, and probably about 40 minutes worth of resting, and then we'll go ahead and pull it. Okay, so we're going to collect all of this juice in this glass bowl. We're going to pour both of these pans worth of juice in here, because this is going to be key to having moisture in our pork, particularly when we put it in the refrigerator to keep. Okay, so if you look here, you'll notice that all of that ugly fat is floating to the top, and underneath is pure liquid. It's just pure moisture and liquid that came out of that pork butt. And so that's what we're doing. We're letting this separate, and then we're going to go ahead and start to pull our pork. There's several different muscles inside of the pork butt, but you'll notice as I'm pulling this apart, and this is the more tender, one of the more tender muscles I'm pulling here. There's some pull to it. You can see that the strands are still kind of connected, and that means you're going to get a good chew when you eat it. It's not going to be mush like I talked about. There's a lot of moisture in there, so it's good just the way it is. Blade bone comes out clean. Meat separates from it easily. That's a sign that your pork is
it's cooked well. It's not dry. That bone comes out dry, then you may have some trouble with your meat. This is one of the tougher muscles. You're going to find it's got a little more pull to it. When it mixes in with the more tender, it'll be better. But this is a whiter meat here. This muscle has a lot more connective tissue. It's drier. Doesn't accept the flavor as easily. But you can see all this moisture in here, and you can see that, like I said, the meat pulls apart. It doesn't fall apart. Okay, so with the au jus, you can see the fat that's at the top. Now when you take this stuff and you just pour that stuff the way it is over your meat, and then you store it in the refrigerator, if you've ever done that, you'll notice that there's just this greasy, nasty fat on your meat. So we're going to take a turkey baster, and I'm going to pull the juices out from underneath that fat layer, and that's what I'm going to put on my pork. And you'll see that after you put this in the refrigerator, that juice will turn into a gel similar to what you see if you've ever opened a canned turkey and you see the gel that's in there. This will set up the same way when it's in the refrigerator, instead of having all that greasy fat in there. That greasy fat that's on the top of this, that's the worst thing for your body. And it really doesn't put moisture in meat. This juice is where the moisture comes from. So when you reheat this, it's not going to be that bland, dry stuff. And on top of the moisture, it's also bringing back in tons and tons of flavor. All the flavors from the rub, from that apple juice, from the natural juices of the pork, they're all in there. So we're just putting that right back in. And this is how we knock it out of the park when we're making that pulled pork like we talked about. That stuff that takes it to that next level. You don't even need to put sauce on this stuff. It's got so many layers of flavor in it, so much moisture in it. Barbecue sauce is not necessary. If you want to have it there just as something extra, it's excellent with barbecue sauce, but it really doesn't have to have it.
Well, there you have it. Pulled pork done the right way. Hope you learned a little bit of something from this, if nothing else. Hope it inspires you to go out and do some cooking out back or wherever you go. You've got all the information you need to do it process-wise, so put your own thought into the spices and get outside and cook.